Good evening, my fellow logotherapists. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening to go through this topic, logotherapeutic encounter. It's the topic is from your study material. We thought we are going to discuss all the different topics which are in the study material for the advanced students. So there it's actually the first logotherapeutic encounter, which I think it is important. We try to cover both for those who have never been exposed to counseling in general, even to those who have been exposed to counseling. We try to look at it from a logotherapy perspective. But the way I'm going to present this topic is going to cover in a way as well interviews, especially for those who would like to conduct research or even conversation. How can one have a meaningful conversation with a fellow human being? So, having said that, I thought for this evening, conversation, we can just reflect on this one, the crisis and paradox of our time, the time we are living today. So I'm suggesting that the more we have better means of communication and transport, the more we experience a sense of isolation and alienation. And then our technological progress does increase. The much it does increase, it comes with our ability to cause harm and suffering to ourselves and to others. So our context is a context of vicious, not circle, but spiral of poverty, violence, high mobility, suffering, and pain, alienation, and isolation. I don't know if you do agree with me, but these are based on my personal observation in the context where I'm living. So as you can see with the previous slide, it's about suffering, violence, poverty, and despite the technological progress, despite the improved the access to means for communication and transport, more people feels isolated and alienated as well. But then I thought I could like to share some ideas about suffering from the African perspective. So this author says African religion teaches that people are made up of moral, social, spiritual, and physical parts. These parts function together. If any part is out of balance, the person may become physically ill or suffer spiritually. That is why a conflict with another person may make someone sick, or a moral misdeed may bring about misfortune. I thought this quote is quite important because it reminds us to be very mindful in the way we relate with other people and in the way we carry ourselves. Because if ourselves, our spirits, our social being, physical being, the emotional being is not together, that can result in some kind of suffering. Then Frankl says, but it does explain why body-mind problem cannot be solved. Of necessity, the unity of man, a unity in spite of the multiplicity of body and mind, cannot be found in the biological or psychological, but must be sought in that neurological dimension out of which man is projected in the first place. I thought I should share this quote with you. I'm sure all these literature things you can read, but I thought they support the idea behind how should be our encounter with another human being, and specifically with a client or with a patient, how should we meet? And Frankl reminds us here that it's very important that beside the body and mind, we need to bring the spiritual dimension, which actually would help to bring these two together as a unit. So now, as I said, in our context, we are living in a context where we witness or go through suffering and violence. So how can we respond to this kind of context with isolation and alienation? From the African perspective, some have written to say, in order to address this state of affairs, this state of violence and suffering, African philosophy has as one of its objectives the goal of recovering the humanistic principle embedded in traditional African thought, and more particularly in the concept of Ubuntu and communality, fulfilling the vision of learning. This one I thought is quite important: learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, and learning to live together as equal with other people or with others. So this is quite an important quote as well for me, that as a logotherapist, we reflect on how do we relate with other people in general, and particularly with our client or patients, depending on how you call them. How do you relate with them? Even when you conduct a research and you are performing your survey and the questioning, doing the interviews and so on, but how do you carry that exercise? It's very important to reflect on that. And another African man said, social relationship is the cornerstone of communal harmony and cohesion, and is the basis of private and public morality. Alienation of self is a result of dissonance between an individual's action and public morality. I am because you are, we are because others are. This again was just to emphasize on how important it is, the place of our social relationship and how do we conduct those relationships, because it's literally defined who we are. And the other authors says, based on that, the importance of the relationship, the social relationship, they would go on and say, the central ethical idea in traditional African thought is Ubuntu. The idea of Ubuntu is related to human happiness and well-being. Ubuntu is usually translated in English as humanity. A fuller meaning of the word Ubuntu can be found in the Nguni expression. Excuse me here because I'm not native Nguni speaking, is the Umuntu, Kubuntu, Kabantu. This means a human being is a human being through other human beings. It's very important. A human being is a human being is a human being through other human beings. In other words, I am because you are. Ubuntu rejects the materialism of the Western world. Ubuntu recognizes that a person exists and develops only in relationship with other people. So, my fellow logotherapists, it's important to realize how important it is when we relate with other people, not only with other logotherapists, not only with our family members or in our practice, but in general. It is very critical to reflect on the way we treat other people. So the African thought goes on to say, according to noted scholar, this is one of the philosophers, John Beatty, they believe that whatever happens to the individual happens to the whole group. And whatever happens to the group happens to the individual. The individual can only say, I am because we are. And since we are, therefore I am. In these community spirits lies their security. Again, very important to say, we have to be mindful of how we behave, how we relate with other people, and its impact on the community within which we are living. Now, in my own case with the experience with my own father, when I was growing up living with him, every time we had a challenging conversation, he would end that conversation with this question, Bumuntu bweba bujipeni, which can be translated as, where is your humanness? And here in South Africa, the Zulu greetings is Sawubona or Sambonani, which means I see you and acknowledge you as one individual or a group of people, that I see you or acknowledge you. But that question from my father, I think, is very, very important to keep it in mind, that how do I at all moments sustain my humanness? Now, you would say, I've talked a lot about African. We are back now to Frankl, the business of the day. And Frankl looks at existence and encounter, and he says the interpretation of existence is in terms of coexistence. So we cannot understand existence without thinking of coexistence. So he goes on to say, in this context, encounter is understood as a relationship between an I and thou, a relationship which, by its very nature, can be established only on the human and personal level. I thought this is important from Frankl when he says this encounter can only be established at the human and personal level. The question is, what is that human and personal level? And he goes on to say, true encounter is a mode of coexistence that is open to the logos, allowing the partner to transcend themselves toward the logos, and even promoting such mutual self-transcendence. Colleague, you are a fellow logotherapist, you understand that here logos means meaning, in this case, from Frankl, and how he believes that in each encounter, in each relationship with other human being, with other fellow human being, we always have to be oriented toward what is meaningful. So after this long background to try and justify the importance of this to today conversation, I thought the aim of our conversation this evening would be to present the logotherapy perspective of human encounter and way of relating with others. That's one. And secondly, to encourage students to apply logotherapy as philosophy of life in their lives and practice counseling, practicing teaching and parenting. So when we look at human encounter today, especially remember with the context I mentioned earlier, the context of alienation, of violence and isolations. Generally today, I don't know about you, when you look around people we meet in different contexts, and even worse in therapy contexts, people who come for counseling, for help, generally they come with a feeling of alienation, or isolation, feeling separated from other people, from other beings, a sense of fear, shame, guilt, and regret. So in that kind of context, what we need to address the issue of alienation and dominance. Here it is very important to be aware that we are meeting this fellow human being, even if they are in need of our service, as equal. We are not meeting them like top-down relationship where we are the experts, we are the superior because we are the one providing counseling or providing knowledge, so they are down and they have to take whatever we give them. Because by doing so, we are reinforcing that sense of being alienated and being dominated by other people around. So while we are meeting people, we have to be aware to address and not to encourage that kind of feeling from the people we are talking to. The second one is that we have to facilitate the process of healing, which should result in optimistic triad. And this optimistic triad is made of hope, love, and faith. And you'd realize, actually, logotherapy, you know that it's a holistic process facilitated by the search for meaning at a spiritual level. So a true encounter then for me would only happen at a spiritual level, and it is directed toward meaning. And by doing so, we can address these two issues of alienation and domination and facilitate the process of healing. Using a phenomenological attitude, I thought then what we need to do when we meet another human being, specifically in the context of counseling and in any other context, to be mindful that we need to acknowledge the person as a true human being, meaning we have to acknowledge them as being with a spiritual dimension and always directed to something meaningful, always being called by life. And we need to acknowledge whatever problem they have and they suffering. We need to acknowledge the context within which they are living. And most importantly, we need to acknowledge their calling or demand of the moment. So all these are very important. We don't have just to focus on the problem the client or patient brings to us, but we also have to be aware of their context and more specifically of the calling of the moment. Because like any other spiritual human being, each one of us is always called in, always given demand in the moment. So the acknowledging the meaning of the moment would always point to what is beautiful, true, good, or right. So the importance of spiritual dimension is such that, first of all, in the environment within which we are living, one could observe that quite often we fail to acknowledge the spiritual dimension of other people and even our own spiritual dimension, because quite often we put much focus on what is visible, what we see, what we can measure, what is objective, what we can test. The material things becomes more important. The invisible things, we don't pay attention to that. So we neglect or overlook values and the calling of the moment. And in doing this, we totally miss the opportunity to fulfill our meaning in each moment. So about this, Frankl says, however, it is my contention that no true dialogue is possible unless the dimension of the logos has been entered. I would say a dialogue without the logos, which logos here meaning lacking the direction of intentional referent, is really a mutual monologue, maybe a mutual self-expression. I don't know if you have experienced that in your life, that you talk with someone and after the talk, after the conversation, you just have a feeling that you did not feel heard or you did not hear the other person, because it kind of two-way talking which are not touching each other. It's a self-expression altogether. So Frankl goes on to say, encounter preserve the humanness of the partner. So meaning if we truly meet the other human being as a spiritual being, we actually preserve and promote and acknowledge their humanness. And love, which comes in, helps to discover his uniqueness as a person. True encounter is based on self-transcendence rather than mere self-expression. Specifically, true encounter transcends itself towards the logos. Pseudo encounter, on the other hand, is based on a dialogue without logos. So for me, it's important to say that true encounter would provide us reason to love, to hope, to believe, and have a will. But these different abilities, it's important to realize that we cannot command them, we cannot order them. I cannot tell my client or my patient, no, have a hope. Please, you should have faith. Please love your wife or your husband or your children. We need to provide them reasons for love, hope, believe, and will. So what could be the attribute of a human encounter? I thought for me, the attribute of the human encounter based on what is called the Frankl's psychiatric and psychological credo, which means that Frankl strongly believed human beings in whatever condition, they always have their spiritual dimension present. And it's important to consider that. And meaning it's unconditional. So with those two credos, then we would always have a true encounter, would be an encounter where the person feels affirmed and acknowledged. It's an encounter which is unique and singular. It can never be repeated again. It's a totally unique moment we spend with this unique other human being. It's always open to the meaning of the moment, meaning that when we meet truly another human being, we all then become geared or listening to what is meaningful, going to applying our self-transcendence capacity. And such an encounter would also facilitate attentive presence. Actually, some author would even say presence has a volume. You might have a presence with high volume or low volume, meaning that you might be there physically, but spiritually you're absent. It's almost as if your volume of your presence is low. And such encounter should bring a sense of safety, security, and privacy as well. Now, you remember I said in your learning document, which you might have been given, this module refers to first encounter. That first encounter, how should it be? For me, I here compare it to the medical model because that's what I'm exposed to as a doctor, but you can think about it. Imagine someone having an interview or an investigation by the police or by the researcher. How do they conduct themselves? How do they conduct themselves? And how will a logotherapist conduct him or herself? In this case, excuse me, in this case, I thought generally would say the function of that first meeting with the client, it's about determining the nature of the problem. What is the problem of this client? What is the complaint? Can I help treat the whatever problem the patient is bringing. But in logotherapy, we work differently. We enter in that moment, in that first moment, and any other moment where we meet other people in a meaningful encounter dialogue, meaning we are meeting the person with a sense of the presence of the logos in that space. Then with the medical model, we would then be working toward developing and maintaining a therapeutic relationship. But for logotherapists, when we meet the other person with that knowledge, that awareness that there is meaning in this moment, we look for logo ins and possible logo problem. So you would see that the one model, I'm sorry, it's problem oriented. The other model is meaning oriented. And again, the other difference is that in the medical model, we communicate information and implement the treatment plan. I'm the doctor, I'm the psychologist or the counselor. I understand your problem. This is how your problem is, and this is how we're gonna take care of your problem. So it's kind of a top-down process, one-way communication. But with the logotherapy model, we want to be aware that this space, it's a space of sharing information. And in sharing those information, the possible application of a therapeutic techniques would come up. It's not things we prepare beforehand and we want to use a specific technique because that's what we know and we want to apply it. It has to come from that interaction where we share information coming from the different side of people meeting in that moment. Talking about logo ints comes from different forms as cue to meaning. The logo ints are the different cue, the indicator, the signal of what could be meaningful for my client or my patient. This could be the physical sensations, the memories, our encounter brings up, the movements, the way we relate in that space, the way we sit, the way we move, when we are seated or standing, the emotions we feel, and the images and thoughts coming to our mind. All that could be indicators or signal of particular meaning or particular values calling us to fulfill the meaning of the moment. So we also have to understand that the human encounter then becomes a kind of a space, and Terea says a particular client and a particular logotherapist have been brought together for a purpose. The purpose is a greater illumination of meaning for both. I think that's very, very important. So I, as a particular person, I am brought in contact with another particular human being for a purpose, and we need to unlock that. So if we look at it that way, then that encounter, that space, it has a contemplative nature. It has a holding environment characteristic. It has to bring a sense of stability, a sense of a sense of stability and security, privacy, as I said, where the person feels that he can rely on another human being. It shouldn't bring a sense of being chaotic without no limitation, without borders in the way we relate to the other person. So now, what could be the outcome of a true human encounter? Lucas, one of the great logotherapists, has shared this thought to say the logotherapeutic custom is that a client should never be released without an answer to the question he or she brought with her or him, without hope of some chance for improvement, without a modest challenge to the power of the noetic dimension. I wish we could reflect on these three, that every time when we have met someone, we have been with someone, especially in a session, counseling session, to ask those questions. Did we at least answer the question which was brought to us? Not necessarily bring the question, but at least acknowledge the question and attempt to say where could be the answer. Did we let the client or the patients leave the session with some kind of hope that things might improve, and that the person is also living with some kind of a calling to be mindful to their spiritual dimension and the calling of the moment in their life. I would like to add for me then that if we have met truly another human being, that being should leave us with a sense of being cared for. I don't know if you've had conversation with people where you just feel like you are lost. You feel like you are even being diminished. Life is just meaningless. That should be the contrary for a logotherapist, a counter. The client should live with a sense of being taken care of. And the person should live with a sense of being acknowledged and affirmed as a human being connected to other beings and the world, with a unique and singular call to respond to. That's so important that after our session, even if the client hasn't found their calling, at least they could have an awareness that there is such thing, that they could have an awareness that life is calling them. Now, there has been a logotherapist who, and even Terea as well, who have suggested, how do we know what are the indicators, the guideposts, as they call them? Terea would say that one of the guideposts is that in that encounter, a true human encounter, it helps one to turn toward what is meaningful, as I mentioned before. And what is meaningful, it is true as science, it is good as moral, it's beautiful as art. This meaning is the call or demand of the present moment in the client. But then Fabry would add to say these are the 5 guideposts of the search to meaning, when one can have a sense of fulfilling his or her calling in life. It's resulting in a self-discovery. It gives one the opportunity to realize the choices they have to make. It's allow one to experience or display the uniqueness as human being, and it allows one to be responsible as being able to respond to the calling of the moment. And it allows one to reach out to the world outside, to other people, to other beings in the world. So these would be the kind of guideposts which could indicate us that we are actually in a true human encounter. But you would see the challenge here with the African thoughts I had shared before, and as we are speaking here, that there could be a kind of paradox between being a singular, unique, and being part of a community connected. And this anthropologist says, our humanity is at once shared and singular, which implies a paradoxical tendency of human being in both seeking individuation and autonomy on the one side, and on the other side, union and connection with other people. Because I know that sometimes some would say, no, this kind of philosophy or this kind of way is more individualistic, but the other one is more collectivistic. But some would say, actually, a human being, we have these tendencies. So I would like to propose that actually self-discovery is to find one uniqueness and singularity while connecting with the therapist or with the therapist and the world. The two can happen at the same time. If then we look at it that way, one can then reflect on these three terms: dependence, independence, and interdependence. So as we say that I am because you are, I can be I only if I'm unique and singular, so that I can relate to you as unique and singular to become who we are. So these two tendencies should not compete. They should be brought together. Now, what's the danger of missing the spiritual dimension and meaning? That can lead to what Frankl had called iatrogenic damage. I'm telling you, it is possible that our clients or our patients can leave our office worse than the way they came. In that case, there is a high chance that we have caused iatrogenic damage. Terea says, the hidden danger of problem-centered therapy is that they can incapacitate us in the area of dealing with the negative and tragic aspect of life. However, in logotherapy, the call to take up responsibility for our life capacitates us. I don't know if you understand. You remember even when I was comparing the medical model to the logotherapy model, or saying that when we are problem-centered, problem-focused, we might actually incapacitate someone. Versus when we are meaning-oriented, we give the person, we empower the person to apply that capacity of responding to their calling. So, would agree to say that the failure to respond to the meaning of the moment in suffering can result in an existential frustration, which we all know that if it's not taken care of, that existential frustration can lead to depression, aggression, addiction, doubt, and anxiety. These terms are used in general. They are not used as a clinical term as we would use them in mental health. So the iatrogenic damage is actually any unintentional physical and mental harm or adverse effect caused to the client or patient by the therapist's action, treatment, or diagnostic procedure. This is so important for us to be aware that when we meet another human being, we should be very mindful of everything we do, because if we don't pay attention, we might cause unnecessary, unintentional suffering to the client, which is, in this case would be the iatrogenic damage. I thought, now Frankl suggests ways of avoiding that. So he says ways of preventing iatrogenic damage is, one, we should allow the client or the patient to relate his or her story. And to be able to, we should also objectify his or her symptoms. We need to give that space to the person to relate their story and let them describe their symptoms and not try to disregard that. He also advised that we should validate the reality of the symptoms and avoid downplaying the symptoms and complaints of the patients or clients. We should also avoid premature diagnosis and stigmatization. The diagnosis, it's not that always important that we should come up with a diagnosis. We should take time to come up with a diagnosis and at all time avoid stigmatization. And finally, we should always provide appropriate reassurance. You would realize by preventing the iatrogenic damage, we are actually going to be able to fulfill what Lucas had asked us, that we meet the person as a person, that they leave us with a sense, with hope that there is a chance to get to get an improvement to their problem, that their problem has been at least understood, and they live with a sense that life is calling them. So I thought this is what I was going to share with you this evening, and I would be more than happy to hear your thoughts and your question about this. Thank you very much for being with me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kanda. Wonderful lesson again. I just particularly like to thank you for introducing the African element and the African world picture and philosophy into your talks. I know you did that in the first one, and I'm assuming and hoping that you're going to continue to do that going forward. I think it's very important for us as an African Institute of Logotherapy that we acknowledge this and take into account the worldviews and philosophies, etc., of the continent we live on. Interestingly, I had an initial meeting with a new student who's joining us in the foundation course, who is in Nairobi in Kenya yesterday, and he said he was so excited. He wanted to study logotherapy, and he found the Austrian Institute in Vienna, and he was going to apply there, and then he suddenly saw there was an African Institute. And he was so excited by this fact that there is a Viktor Frankl Institute on his continent where he can study. That's wonderful, and I think it's important and very meaningful that you're bringing this aspect into the talks, particularly at this level with our advanced students who are going to start working with clients from all communities and all walks of life. So thank you for that. And I think out of that came some really beautiful new insights. I was particularly taken by the concept of dependence, independence, and interdependence. The thing of individuality versus community. I thought was a very interesting and exciting thing to explore. You know, we so often talk about the uniqueness of the individual in logotherapy, but what I think your talk tonight illustrated so beautifully is that despite the fact that we are each and every one of us unique individuals, we actually only really exist in that uniqueness in our relationship with others, the I see you, the I and the thou. And that was came home to me very profoundly this evening. The other thing I'd like to say, and this class, it reminded me of the terror I felt when I first was brought up and said, right, what happens if I miss the spiritual dimension? And I'm going, oh my word, how do I know when I'm entering the spiritual dimension myself? How do I know? Am I addressing the client in the spiritual dimension? I think this can be something which is very frightening, and something which several students have asked me. They say, where is the crossover from the psychological to the spiritual? I'd be interested in your comments on that fear that can, because as you said also earlier in the talk, we're so focused on that which can be quantified, measured, etc. And the noological, the noetic dimension is not one of those things. How do we access it? How do we know we're working with it? How do we know we have successfully brought a client into that space?
Thank you very much. That is a fair question, and I hope would be able. First of all, that anxiety as a student, we all have it. Yeah, we all have it. It is important to acknowledge that anxiety is part of being a human being, because it can mean a lot of things, and including a spiritual dimension as well, that one becomes aware of the sacredness of the moment they are getting in. So we should not be fighting against the anxiety. We might be listening to it. What does it tell us? It could be telling us that this is an important moment. Pay attention, listen. So that one thing. The second is, yes, the issue is, it's not that easy, because I remember some of us at the beginning would say, now even our wives or partners and children are now used to us. They're like, oh, the next question is, what is the meaning of the moment? What is the meaning of the moment? So we want to, and sometimes that on its own takes away the meaning of the moment. As I said, is for us to be the logo ins and Frankl is so, for me, is so insightful when he said it's the spiritual dimension which link the body to the mind. So we need to acknowledge our emotions. When I see someone, the first thought which comes into my mind, when my client sits in the office, the first things which comes into my mind could be telling me something about the client, and we can explore that. You see someone coming wearing all black. We could ask, what is this color means to you? And that could take a conversation in a particular direction. One could mention the name of a family member or the name of a friend with a smile or with a sad face. That is a moment as well we can stop and say, is there something here? And what could it be? What could be behind that? I don't know if it makes sense. So what I'm trying to say is, those logo inks, the cue to meaning, are the way for us to pick up these, what could be taking us toward what is meaningful. Of course, we can make mistakes. And this is why we don't come as the superior who knows it all. We come as equal, and we listen, we ask, we give space. Sometimes it's the silence. The client comes in, the silence. Even yourself as a therapist, you don't have, you are blank. Stop and acknowledge that moment. It could be a moment of just being silent, because silent as well could be a way of acknowledging the person, affirming the person, because not everything can be put in word. I don't know if I've answered your question, but it's a very, very difficult question. One just have to realize that the spiritual dimension is not something on its own. It's part of who we are. It's defined who we are. And it's through, we experience it through our body, and we experience through our thoughts and emotions. Then when we are aware of these, we can ask, as we said, move from the visible, from the material, to the invisible, to say, what's the value behind this black clothes the client is wearing? What's the value behind the tears or the smile the client is presenting? I don't know if that makes sense. So it's keeping that awareness that there is a calling. And by the way, if I may say, that calling, Frankl says, meaning it's fulfilled through the realizations of values, and the values are three. So behind the smile, behind the tears, behind the love of a particular color, there could be some particular values the client wants to realize. And by realizing them, they fulfill the meaning of the moment. Because the person might tell you, no, I'm wearing black because I love black. When I put on black, I feel myself, I feel confident. And that is an experience, is an experiential value. So we can stop there and say, hey, you are lucky to even have that black gloves and feel the way you are feeling, because some of us do not have that that opportunity. So that is just an acknowledgement, experiential value as it is. And then it can even push further and say, okay, now that you feel confident, that you are beautifully dressed in your all black dress or your all black suit, what are you feeling ready to offer the world outside there? Because in that way, we now become oriented toward the world outside there. So one could say, now that I feel the way I'm feeling, I'm ready to take it on. I'm ready to care for so-and-so. I'm ready to provide the care or the service I'd like to. I don't know. I'm just trying to come up with whatever I can pick up in my mind to say, yes, the anxiety is totally understandable. It's part of who we are. We do not have to chase it away or to deny it. We have to acknowledge it because it could be telling us something. But as Franco says, the spiritual dimension is not something outside there, it's something within us, which brings the body and the mind together. And by experiencing our body and mind, we can uncover the value and fulfill the meaning of the moment. Mark, I'm sorry, it stopped me. I talk a lot, and yeah, please.
No, it's wonderful to hear you talking. Thank you. Yeah, we are about to run out of time. I'd just like to say at this point, the advanced and professional students, you will have received, I see some of you have responded. Coral sent out the letter today to invite you to the setting up of your student group, your discussion group, your interaction group. And I'm thinking, that is going to be such a great platform for you to have discussions like these that come out of these sessions with Dr. Kanda. You could carry a conversation like this forward amongst yourselves in your discussion groups when you decide when and how you're going to meet. You could one of the things you could do is pick up on these sessions with Dr. Kanda and carry them into those groups when you meet one another. I think there's so much to be said about this thing. I think the lovely Elizabeth Lucas, who you quoted, the other thing, of course, that she says about logotherapy is that it's the most improvisational form of therapy. And that is very much linked, I think, to Frankl when he talks about the artistic sensibility and how the artistic conscience also is in the noetic dimension. And he talks about how performing artists sometimes seize up completely because of trying to do everything so consciously in the moment and getting it right, whereas you have to give yourself over to instinct and intuition of the artistic conscience, which is in the noetic dimension. And I think that is also very much true. He also says all therapy is something of an art. And if you take Elizabeth Lucas's logotherapy being the most improvisational form of therapy, I think as logotherapists, we have to think like artists, and we cannot be focused on, I've got to get this right. Am I getting the logo hint? Am I getting into the spiritual dimension? It comes from, yes, I think the anxiety about, keeps us on our toes, but one has got to be in a state of such openness and relaxation and in the moment to be able to respond absolutely instinctively and improvisationally in the moment to the encounter between oneself and the client. And that is something that I learned very early on. The tension and fear was something that got very much in the way of my ability to really be there for the client.
Thank you very much. And everyone is more than welcome to share their thoughts now or even after. You are more than welcome to pass it either through directly to me or to Pen, who is going to share, so that we keep the conversation. And as Mark said, it's important in your group as students to keep it alive and share your dialogue among yourself. Yes. And actually, that's the reason of these presentations. Is not at all for me to, I don't know it all. So it's just creating a space where we can all be mindful, contemplative, reflecting in the way we are learning and applying what we are learning.
Thank you, Dr. Kanda, for the session. It was very valuable. And thanks to Mark for the question, because I also had this question around the spiritual dimension. How do we best evoke it from our clients? And I think maybe for our group going forward, my question would be, well, how should the client feel, or what should they experience when we have accessed the spiritual dimension? So if we look at things from the client's perspective, what would they be feeling in that moment when we've successfully done that? So that would be maybe a discussion question I'd like to take forward. Thanks very much for the session.
Thank you very much. That's a relevant question. We might not necessarily cover it here, but yes, that is very important. How does the clients feel? And we are actually, I don't know about you, we are actually allowed to ask the clients how did you feel through the session or even the previous session. That would allow us to give them a space to express their experience. It's very important. And we have to remember, as much as all moments are calling us, but we are in that moment, in that session, not for our meaning, but for the meaning of the client. We have to facilitate the meaning of the client, to facilitate that the client becomes aware of his or her calling in the moment. And it's up to them to tell us how they feel. It's up to them. And make no mistake, they might say, nah, this was the most boring session I've heard, or this was hurtful. It's still a space to learn. It's still a space to learn, because we can turn that into an opportunity, a learning opportunity, to say what happened. It might be not necessarily because we did something wrong, but it might be because we have brought the person to the right moment to acknowledge the wrong they did in their life, because that is part of affirming and acknowledging. It's to affirm and acknowledge the person, but to acknowledge as well their problem and acknowledge their calling. So this experience of regret, of sadness can come up. We are not there to make people feel good. We are there to invite them to be aware and respond to their calling. And in that process, they'll deal with whatever feeling they are having. I don't know if attempt to kind of say that is an important question, which we need to keep in mind, to ask ourselves, how does my client feel in this moment and when they leave my session? But I believe we might next time as well talk about it and see. I'm sure the different topics would come to that. Remember the first session was literally about the unconditional, meaningful life of each human being. Life is worth. The life of my client is worth. The client is worth taken care of. That on its own can give a particular sense to the client that I'm here all for you. I'm here for you. I don't know how will you feel if you're a client that you have another human being who truly shows that they are here for you. They don't have to say they are here for you, but you feel the way they relate with you, the way they address you. This is why things like love and faith and hope, we cannot instruct them. I cannot tell the client, okay, I love you, or you love me, or believe in this, or believe in the meaning of the moment. We need to find the reason for them to have that faith and belief. Sorry again, I get carried away when maybe it's because we don't always, I don't always have a meaningful conversation like this one. So when I get it, I tend to.
Please don't apologize, Dr. Kanda. We love listening. We can listen to you forever.
Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Kanda, I think this was a masterpiece, this particular presentation. It's a masterpiece. Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, we were out of time. Does anybody else have anything?
I say something for those who don't know. Penn has been the how do you call it, the hero in how do you say it, Mark, in backstage, because she has helped in
the power behind the throne.
yes. So, but thanks a lot, Penn. And it's not only today, it has been like that. It has been like that. Many of my presentations, you are more likely to be right to say Penn has been somewhere correcting something here or suggesting something there. Yes, Penn, thank you very much for your support. And thanks for the compliment.
Okay, if nobody else has got anything they'd like to ask or comment on. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kanda, for another wonderful session. We look forward to next month's session. Students, particularly advanced, please encourage your fellow students to. I know a lot of people can't make this time, so some people are viewing the recordings. But I think there is something, and I'm sure you'll agree, there's something special about being here in the moment and being able to talk and raise thoughts and share ideas. So yeah, when you get your groups going, also encourage your peers to try and come to the sessions if they possibly can. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.